Well, good morning. Now that we're all here, we're going to get started. Thank you all for joining us. I thought it would be a good time for an update on the legislative session, which ends a little less than 2 weeks. Um, no later than 6 p.m. on Thursday, the 8th of June. And I'm joined, as you can see, by CPRA Chairman Chip Klein, who is going to help me kick off this press conference by discussing very significant development that happened yesterday, and that is the passage of the 2023 Coastal Master Plan, which is the 6-year revision, and then the annual plan for fiscal year 24. Uh, I would note at the outset that both of these instruments passed without a single dissenting vote, House or Senate. I do want to thank Senator Henskins, excuse me, Senator Henskins and Representative Zarang. They authored the instruments. And I will simply state that there's not another state in the country that has a plan anything like ours. It is built on science. It incorporates extensive public input. Obviously, while we are investing heavily, we are resource constrained. And so we want to make sure that we're doing the projects that make the most sense and gain the most ground as soon as possible, because we are in a race against time. I would remind you that the overall contours, it's a 50-year, no less than $50 billion plan for coastal restoration and protection. Again, it's built on world-class science and engineering that identifies investments that will pay off for us, our children, and our grandchildren. And sometimes when we mention that $50 billion figure, people can't really take that in. But I want the folks of Louisiana to know that we are on track in the current fiscal year that ends late next month on June 30th. We're on track to invest $1.3 billion. Next year, it's more than $1.6 billion that will be invested. And then we have a 3-year forecast, and we're well over $1 billion in each of those years. And so obviously, if you have a 50-year plan and you're intending to invest no less than $50 billion, you've got to average at least $1 billion a year. Well, we're doing that. But we're not just throwing money at the problem. We're doing it in a way that really makes sense, that follows the science. And it is an all of the above approach, but the specific projects for the specific areas are those that the scientists are telling us will work best there, that are the most cost effective. And we can be all, I think, acknowledge that the funding sources are varied and they're all very important. So we have the GOMESA funding, which is the offshore federal revenue sharing from mineral production. But we've also received significant funding from the BP oil spill and surpluses, which we've had a surplus every single year since I've been governor. And what we do, the recommendations we make to the legislature is, with the discretionary portion of the surplus, that a third of that go to coastal restoration every year. And then you have the traditional capital outlay program. I do want to remind everybody that the BP oil spill dollars will go away in 2032. And so obviously one of the most important things we have to do between now and then is replace that revenue source so that we can continue to have a very robust program of investing in our coast. To address the challenges of that coast, the 2023 Coastal Master Plan. And so this is that every 6 years we are required by statute to have a comprehensive revision of the plan. And I'm going to talk at a high level about that. I think Chip's going to talk a little more about the FY24 annual plan. But the 2023 Coastal Master Plan identifies 77 restoration and risk reduction projects that literally span the entire coast, from Cameron Parish in the southwest to St. Bernard Parish in the southeast. These would restore and maintain over 300 square miles of Louisiana's coastal wetlands and reduce expected annual damage by up to $15 billion compared to a future without action. And by the way, that is not an option. A future without action doesn't look good. Uh, so much of our population, so much of our industrial base and our economy is based along the coast, that not investing in coastal restoration and protection simply is not an option. Since 2016, so over the course of the 2 terms that I've been governor, we've restored and maintained 83 miles of levees, 26,118 acres of coastal land, and 22 miles of barrier island. And we see the benefits of this every time there's a storm. And we've had some significant storms this, especially in 2020 and 2021, and horrific wind damage. But if you look at the water damage from rain, but more so from tidal surge, really have been minimal, especially compared with similar storms that happened just a few years earlier before we had the level of protection that we have today. So what I'm really trying to say is we already see the benefits. It isn't like we have to wait 50 years to see the benefits of what we're doing. Every single project is producing benefits in real time. And then just to wrap up and give the podium to Chip, we have a real sense of urgency here in Louisiana about the coast, which is one of the reasons that we're fighting so hard in this current session to make sure that surplus dollars, one-time dollars, that the capital outlay program recognizes this important role that CPRA plays in the coastal master plan with all of these protection and restoration projects. And we are committed in Louisiana to saving our sportsman's paradise with the most robust effort and scientifically advanced program in the country, if not the world. And we are making real progress. And I thank the legislature, but I also thank everyone here at CPRA, and especially Chairman Chip Klein.
Well, thank you, Governor. Yesterday was a monumental day for the state's coastal program with the unanimous approval of both the 2023 master plan and the FY24 annual plan. And so, as the governor just noted, the master plan is really the state's vision for the long-term sustainability of South Louisiana that prioritizes how the state intends to spend $50 billion over 50 years. And if there's one talking point that I really think summarizes the value in the overall master plan, it is this: that in 50 years, Louisiana will have less flood risk than we do today if we implement every single project within the master plan. And so we hear a lot of projections in the scientific community and around the world about sea level rise projections and the fact that we may need to relocate mass populations across South Louisiana. But if we implement this master plan, the projects called for within it can withstand those environmental scenarios. And we will have less flood risk in South Louisiana in 50 years than we do today. And while the master plan is obviously a monumental effort, if you know anything about Louisiana politics, it's unheard of that you get a unanimous approval of a $50 billion plan. But one of the things that we're most proud of today is the fact that in the next fiscal year 2024, we will invest a record-breaking $1.6 billion in coastal restoration and hurricane protection projects across the coast. That includes 147 active projects next year. We are referring to next year as the year of the dredge. That is because we have over 20 dredging projects across South Louisiana that will create over 15,000 acres of new land. And a $1.6 billion investment in our coast, we will create over 9,500 jobs and generate over $570 million in income for homes and businesses in the state of Louisiana. And so $1.6 billion is obviously impressive, but the most impressive statistic within the annual plan is the fact that over 80% of those expenditures are going to construct, to actually implement projects that have been envisioned for years. And so, as the governor just mentioned, is that he has been very generous to the coastal program over the last several years. And as a result of excess revenue from the previous fiscal year, he prioritized $157 million in additional revenue for the state's coastal program. Those dollars are going to fund projects in areas that were impacted during Laura, Delta, Ida. You can get into the Greek alphabet there if you want to. They're going to cover increased costs as a result of inflation, and it will literally leverage hundreds of millions of dollars from the federal government. And so today, legislators that represent areas in South Louisiana have a question that they need to ask themselves. Do they want to go home at the end of session and tell their constituents that they were able to secure additional revenue for levees, pump stations, surge barriers that provide them with flood protection, which reduce their risk from hurricanes and strengthening storms? Or do they want to go home and tell their constituents that they decided not to take advantage of that opportunity? And so one of the things that the governor says often is that the issue of the protection and restoration of South Louisiana is an issue that affects every single aspect of Louisiana's economy. When LA1 is underwater, this country is cut off from 20% of the nation's oil and gas supply. When a hospital is underwater, it cannot provide the healthcare services to those in need. When our universities or our high schools or our lower elementary schools are underwater, students are impacted. And so that's why this issue of restoring and protecting our coast must remain at the forefront of not only state government, but the federal government for the next several years. And so I too want to just thank Representative Zarang, Senator Hinskins for their leadership in shepherding these plans through the Louisiana legislature, and as well as all the members of the CPRA staff, some of which are here today, for their good work, their diligence in creating a plan that I believe all of Louisiana can be proud of.
Thank you, Chip. With only a couple of weeks left in the session, and as we start to look to wrap this up in terms of the session, which hopefully and should be the last session of my 2 terms as governor, we are very much focused on getting the most important bills to the finish line, but especially the money bills. As y'all know, this is a fiscal session, and of course we have to do a budget every year. But my position remains that we need to make the strategic investments that the overwhelming majority of Louisianans believe are appropriate and wise. In fact, they demand, and that is very heavy on education. And so I believe that the final budget should absolutely have a $3,000 pay raise for our teachers. I believe that they need to restore the $51 million for early childhood education, plus the additional dollars that we'll be recommending for early childhood education out of the additional funding available after the REC forecast from last week. But also the $57 million in additional funding for higher education as well. Since I last appeared at a press conference. The revenue estimating conference did meet. It happened last week on Thursday. The REC recognized an additional $323 million in the current fiscal year that ends June 30th. And for the fiscal year that starts July 1st, an additional $483 million. That reflects the growth and diversification of our economy. And that is a very good thing. We continue to have record low unemployment. We have record employment. We have the highest ever personal income in Louisiana. But one other thing the REC did is they looked into the future. And given the trend line that we're on, the forecast, the actual forecast for the out years, they no longer see a deficit when the 0.45 cents of additional sales tax goes away in FY26. Because of the responsible way that we have been running our government and budgeting, the fiscal situation is not just really good today, but that continues into the future. Because we've always taken the most conservative forecast, which maximizes the chance of a surplus and the largest surplus possible, but it also minimizes any risk of deficit. And then within those forecasts, especially over the last several years, and to the largest degree in the current budgeting cycle, we don't even use all the recurring general fund for recurring expenditures. We're starting to put record amounts of recurring funds into one-time expenditures. And that's how you keep the revenue projections such that you don't have a deficit in the out years, even when you lose the 0.45 cents of sales tax. And so that's really important to understand where we are today, but what the future looks like as well. And then it reinforces this notion. If we don't get our teachers to the Southern Regional average this year with that $3,000 pay raise plus whatever the locals can do, when will we ever do it? And what statement are we sending to our teachers? More importantly, what are we saying to our children? That we value them less than our neighboring states? I know that's not the case, but our budgets ought to reflect our values. It ought to reflect our priorities. So I continue to call on the legislature to fund that pay raise so that we can get our teachers to the Southern Regional average. There's just no reason why we shouldn't take advantage of this opportunity. I know that the Senate's taken up the bills, and then, of course, they'll have to go back to the House. And so we continue to work with leadership, House and Senate, Republicans and Democrats,